All right, here we go. Starting to finish up chapter 27, A Time of Challenge and Change. In the last section, we oh, read about, sure, how NATO was formed and how Europe was divided in two. And we talked about communism and the Marshall Plan and containment policy. Good idea to review that. But we have some actual fighting that emerges, and it's called the Korean War or the War in Korea. So that's what this lesson is about. So let me just preview it real quick. Nothing big seeing there. Um, where there's offensive, say offensive means attacking rather than defending. And how did fighting begin? So pretty straightforward. There's not any. Oh, one more. How did the Korean War end? No fancy pictures in this. I guess just all nuts and bolts. So we might as well giddy up and get going. Here we go. Communism in Asia also presented a problem for the United States and its allies. Since the 1920s, a civil war had been waged between two Chinese political groups. Those groups were the Chinese Communist Party and the Nationalist Party, which controlled the Chinese government. During World War II, the parties joined together to fight the invading Japanese. With the defeat of Japan, these rival political groups began to fight each other again. The United States supported the Nationalist Party. In 1949, the Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong, defeated the Nationalist Party. The Truman administration opposed the new Chinese Communist government, but there was little that they could do about it. The Communist Chinese Revolution caused bitter political debates in the United States over who had lost China. The peninsula of Korea is located between China and Japan. During World War II, the Japanese conquered Korea. After the war, the country was divided into two parts. The Soviet Union occupied the northern section. The United States controlled South Korea. In 1948, the Democratic Republic of Korea was formed in the south. America withdrew its troops from the South and provided economic aid to the new country. The Soviet Union created a communist government in North Korea called the Democratic People's Republic. From the beginning, there was tension between North and South Korea. On June 25th, 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. 2 days later, the United Nations Security Council declared that North Korea was wrong. The Security Council asked the United Nations, or UN, to help South Korea. The Soviets had been boycotting the UN, so they were unable to vote this plan of action, unable to veto this plan of action. With UN backing, President Truman ordered American troops to support the South Koreans. Okay, so just to review what's happening here, not that it's that important, but this is what I spent a lot of time in college is studying this top paragraph about the Chinese Civil War, and it is very interesting. And I also live in China for 3 years and I speak Chinese. So I'm pretty much an expert in this one. Um, and you should just understand that China is still a communist country today, but it is not like a communist country that the Soviet Union was. Okay. Um, there's definitely a lot of rich people and there's a lot of poor people in China today, but the Chinese Communist Party is still in power. And they rose to power as of 1949. And it is the same um, political party that has ruled for all these years. And so when you see things in the news and you can, especially with COVID, people are upset and they blame China for it. And I'm not going to get into that right now. Um, but the fact is that you can see its roots um, back to this point, okay? And it became a communist country and we couldn't really do much about it. And so it's been that way ever since. All right. And then we have a civil war that breaks out in Korea as well between the North and the South. And as of 1950, There is invasion, so North Korea invades. All right, how did fighting begin? 15 other nations agreed to help South Korea. Still, the defense of South Korea was mainly an American responsibility. President Truman refused to call the fighting in Korea a war. Instead, Truman called it a police action. The goal was to force North Korean troops to return to their own territory. So it is called the Korean War, okay? But both Vietnam and Korea, we never declared war. And that's kind of weird to think about. But at best, we can call it a conflict because Congress never approved or never declared war. So, Truman's words of police action is actually more accurate because it's not officially war, never declared war. All right. Armed with many modern tanks and weapons supplied by the Soviet Union and China, North Korea captured Seoul, the South Korean capital. General Douglas MacArthur, commander of the American troops, was not prepared to fight an offensive war. Soon, only a small area in the southeast remained under UN control. MacArthur set up a defensive line at the southern port of Busan. Then, with the aid of 50,000 more American troops, the UN forces were able to stop the North Koreans and take the offensive. MacArthur and his troops were able to push the North Korean army past their own capital toward the Chinese province of Manchuria. Communist China had warned the UN that it would become involved if troops moved any closer to Manchuria. MacArthur told Truman that China would not enter the war. However, on November 26, 1950, about 300,000 Chinese soldiers attacked the American army in North Korea. American troops were pushed back into South Korea. Fortunately, by the following spring, they were able to set up a new defensive line. All right, as part of this advance, because I lived in China and this kind of came up, and Chinese people don't hate us or anything like that, but we did actually fight them at this point. Um, One thing that I remember my friend, his name is Tinbo, telling me is that, well, they had very old planes. So there was a little bit of an aircraft battle, and I think his grandfather um, was a pilot, and his commander, because their planes were not as good, they're older, etc., his commander told him to literally just try to run his plane into the other plane, to collide or ram it in midair because they knew they couldn't outmaneuver it and they knew they couldn't outgun it. So that was their best chance of taking out the American forces. So kind of interesting, isn't it? Okay, going on. Um, did I read that? Yes, I did. General MacArthur asked Truman for permission to bomb China. I just want to pause real quick. Yes, he had a plan of bombing with atomic weapons 26, I think it was 26 Chinese cities. So we're talking about like wiping the country off the map almost. Can you imagine how terrible that would be? Uh, we know we dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan in World War II, and we still get flack, and people disagree with that decision. Imagine how that would have been like just attacking the whole country. Would it have done the job? I don't know. All right. Truman feared that bombing would bring the Soviet Union into the war. When Truman refused, MacArthur asked Congress for permission. This action angered Truman. General MacArthur was challenging the power of the president. Truman fired MacArthur in April 1951. So I think I have it in my presentation, but this is like, a little power spit between Truman and MacArthur because the president of the United States is the commander in chief of the armed forces, right? He does outrank any general. But MacArthur just did not want to play ball with President Truman. So they're going back and forth, back and forth. Finally, the president fires him. Okay, how did the Korean War end? Peace talks began in July 1951. So I just kind of want to point this out, and I said this earlier in the chapter. Some of the fighting, November 1950, and they invaded in June. And so it's really only 1951, so it's really only like a year later. There's only like a year of actual fighting. Peace talks began in July 1951. The two sides disagreed on the problem of prisoner exchange. The communists wanted all prisoners returned to their homeland. The United Nations wanted to give the prisoners a choice. Negotiations continued for 2 years. An agreement was reached in July 1953. Prisoners had their choice. North and South Korea became two separate nations. North and South Korea each withdrew 1.25 miles from the final battle line. This formed a 2.5-mile neutral zone between them. The North Koreans and Chinese who opposed the communists in North Korea were allowed to stay in South Korea. To provide protection from any future attacks, American troops stayed in South Korea. The United States also gave further economic aid. So this is called the DMZ, or Demilitarized Zone. It still exists in Korea today. One of my coworkers recently went to Korea, and he even went to near the DMZ, and he says still heavily guarded, and it was kind of crazy to be there. But okay, let's read through the review. Excuse me. Which country? So North Korea, Soviet Union, Manchuria invaded South Korea in 1950. Most of the UN troops that fought in the Korean War were supplied by President Truman. Called the fighting in Korea President Truman fired General MacArthur because the general. And 5, after the war, the United States continued to help South Korea with troops and. All right. One last one, I'll just go kind of what do you think? Do you think the United States is right to provide economic aid to poor countries? Why or why not? Obviously, this is an opinion question. Is it our job to take care of the world? Um, should we have maybe let these countries fall to communism? Should we have gone in there and rescued and helped them out? We still give away millions and billions, maybe trillions of dollars every year to other countries. I have to look what that number is, but it's definitely in the billions or more range. And is it our job, right? Is it our job to take police action, to kind of be the world police? Because since the end of World War II, that's kind of what we have done, you know. Um, Whether people like it or not, we are trying to keep the world safe, at least from our point of view, and in many ways our own interests. So that's just something to think about. And do you think we should be giving money out to those poor countries? Well, I guess my opinion is yes. You know, that we should be doing whatever we can to help other people throughout the world. We shouldn't hang on to all of our wealth like a treasure trove and just say, well, too bad, so sad. We've got all these resources, you don't. Haha. Um, okay. That's it for today.